The red-haired girl coughed again. Her name is Irina Rainkars. She is the eldest daughter of the Count of the Rainkars family. A young man came up and wrapped her in a blanket. It was her husband, Henry. He said it was still cold at this time of year and offered to make some hot tea. They've been married for 3 years now. But everything is exactly the same as when they first met. This man makes her really happy. Watching a couple of birds outside the window, Irina remarked that it would be wonderful if they had children. The husband gently took her face and, lifting it a little, asked if his wife was still thinking about children. The 20-year-old girl squeezed Henry's hand tenderly and replied a little sadly that this was what she had been dreaming about since the day they met. She would really like to give birth to a son similar to her husband, so that she could frolic with him in the garden, so that the baby would grow up to be as good a doctor as her husband. The blonde kissed Irina's fingers tenderly. The man said that his wife was the most important person for him, and she would definitely recover and become healthy. Serving a cup of hot tea, he said that he had heard that the Count had made a lot of effort to obtain this drink for his daughter. Taking the cup with the hot potion in her hands, the Countess remembered that when they met, Henry had prepared the same tea for her. That day, more than 3 years ago, young Irina was reading a book when someone knocked and asked permission to enter. The girl gave permission, slightly startled by surprise. A tall young blonde man with green eyes entered the room. The Countess froze in admiration. The guy introduced himself as Henry and said that he was her new doctor. He also added that he was pleased to meet her. He brought a pot of red dandelion tea with him. This was the drink the Count had spoken of. He poured the liquid into a cup and handed it to the girl. Still looking at him, fascinated, Irina thanked him. That was how the inexperienced new doctor met the Count's eldest daughter. The young Countess was one of the most famous socialites in the empire. After some time, the couple got married. People whispered that Count Rainkars had made a very unusual choice of groom, to which his lordship replied that his daughter's happiness was his top priority. The wedding was perfect, even though Irina was always very sick, but thanks to Henry they created the perfect marriage. But soon the groom's evil smile was revealed. That day, a heavy downpour suddenly began. The maids tried to quickly hide in the building. They were worried about the lady, because it was very cold at that time. But they decided that everything would be fine, because she had such a kind husband. At this time, Henry stroked the red hair of his young wife. He whispered in her ear that they had been together for 3 years and praised her for holding on so well. Then, with an evil look in his eyes, he added that today would be her last day. Unfortunately, her dreams were not destined to come true. He described how beautiful death would be. She would fall asleep forever in the arms of her beloved husband. Irina felt a strange change in her body. Her husband was saying strange things, so she asked him again what he was talking about. Henry grabbed her hair sharply and said that you can't trust people so easily. Despite all her good qualities, she will die without ever having time to blossom. And all because she is stupid. Her cruel parents are to blame for this. She drank red dandelion extract since childhood. Irina remembered that her father actually forced her to drink this tea when she was still a child. Henry kept saying that there was no need to hate him. He was just asked to kill her. Her father. Irina was again seized by a fit of coughing. She tried to induce vomiting with 2 fingers, but nothing happened. Henry took her by the shoulders and quietly reminded her that this poison had been pouring into her body for decades, so it was useless to do this now. The girl slapped his hand away. Sitting exhausted on the floor with tears in her eyes, she said that it was all a lie, that her father would never do such a thing. Her husband reminded her once again who first poured her this tea when this unknown disease appeared. At this time, in another room, sitting in front of the fireplace, Count Rainkars was looking through papers. He liked the sound of the rain. Tearing up the document, he noted that from now on they would no longer need red dandelion extract. The deal with this guy who only cares about money is finally done. Irina remembered that her father checked on her every morning and prepared the medicine himself until she fell asleep. Her father was kind to her, so the Countess did not understand why he treated her like that. To confirm his words, the husband asked her opinion on why he was able to marry her, although he was a commoner. It's simple, because the Count asked him to. Maybe he has something more important than his daughter. Irina asked almost hysterically why he did this to her. Did he really never love her? The blonde chuckled at the word love. He was grateful for this relationship with her. And today he had deliberately increased the dose of the medicine. Today is the last day he can be her husband. Irina began to feel her mind clouding over at once. She understood that she had to run away from here. The girl tried to push Henry away, but her body was weak and she fell to the floor again. The man looked at her with disappointment and reminded her once again that it was useless. He lifted his wife's almost limp body into his arms and carried her to the bed. The husband said that he himself had recently learned that of the family of Count Raincars, she had the most outstanding abilities. Stroking her cheek, he remarked that this was probably why she had to die. As a child, her ability always caused a great stir in the Count's house. He suggested that she remember this on her journey to the underworld. Irina silently prayed for someone to save her. Even if she died, she would never let that happen again. Her consciousness sank into oblivion. In her clouded mind, she heard a call to tame her darkness and let the starry flowers bloom. When the moon hid, she needed to come to him. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a female voice asking her to wake up. It was a familiar voice. Irina tried to open her eyes. In front of her, she saw the frightened face of the maid Lola. The girl was asking if everything was okay with her mistress. The Countess remembered that this maid had worked in the mansion before her marriage. In her head, someone was still calling her to step into the shadows and come to him when the moon was hidden. She lay in her bed, not noticing anything around her. Lola was sitting nearby, looking after her mistress. Suddenly, Irina started moaning. The maid ran up to her and tried to bring her to her senses. But the Countess did not wake up. Tears silently flowed from her eyes, and only one phrase was spinning in her brain: that she needed to run. Lola screamed for help. After a while, the Count entered the room and asked what all the fuss was about. The maid reported that the lady had suddenly had a fit and did not know what to do. The man leaned over to his daughter and hugged her. He promised to do everything in his power. Irina only slightly opened her eyes and again went limp in her father's arms. Eden, the eldest son of the Raincars family, entered the room and addressed his father. The Count was surprised to see his son. Shaking his finger menacingly in front of the boy's face, the man asked why he was here. After all, he had to go to the Imperial Palace tomorrow. Ed asked excitedly if his sister was okay. Dad tiredly touched his head and replied that she was okay. She had fallen asleep again. Putting his hand on his son's shoulder, he told him that he needed to go to bed. Otherwise, the whole schedule would be ruined tomorrow. The Count practically pushed his son out of the room. The young man only managed to steal a glimpse of his sister. She was lying on the pillows and her face was calm and peaceful. As soon as the door closed behind the guy, the Count angrily yelled at the maid. If she screamed again and woke anyone up, she would have no mercy. The maid looked down in fear and shrank back. She only whispered, "Yes, Count." At dawn, Irina opened her eyes. The maid sitting next to her immediately perked up and asked how her mistress was feeling. The girl quietly asked Lola if it was her. The maid confirmed and asked again if the mistress was okay. The Countess sat up and asked what had happened. The maid replied that she had had a fit in the middle of the night. The girl tried to understand whether she was saved or it was all a dream. Lola took her hand and said that she was really scared for her. Irina asked how old she was. The maid was surprised by the question but answered that she had turned 20 this year. Then she cautiously asked again if the lady was sure that there was no need to call a doctor. Her ladyship remembered that she had turned 20 in the spring, just at the time she met Henry. My husband's words immediately came to mind when he said that he had deliberately increased the dose of the medicine, and then said goodbye to her. Irina clutched the fabric of her dress and tears welled up in her eyes. Lola, still holding her mistress's hand, said she would call a doctor. Her Grace, wiping away the tears that had come, did not understand how her father, whom she trusted and whom she loved, was constantly forcing her to drink poison. Perhaps even the cookies and candies that her brother secretly brought her were also poisoned. Henry's words immediately came to mind, that out of all the family of Count Raincars, she had the most outstanding abilities. The Countess realized that from that moment on she had to question everything. Sometime later, Irina came to have breakfast in the garden gazebo. In front of her on the table stood a teapot and several kinds of cakes. The girl looked thoughtfully at the food. Her father came up and said that if she didn't have breakfast, she wouldn't even be able to take her medicine. He then added that he had heard that she had refused to see Henry, and he was actually a good doctor. Irina thought about how blind she was, but replied that she was fine. The Count chuckled and mentioned that new flowers had recently been planted in the front garden, so he suggested eating there for a change and added that he was worried about her. Even Ed and Renee didn't eat breakfast. After all, today the sister has an audience with the Crown Prince, but because of her night attack, no one got enough sleep. Even his skin became rough. Her father urged her to think about the feelings of her family, who were worried about her, and not to be so selfish. But Irina was preoccupied with her thoughts. She wondered why she hadn't noticed anything then. She had previously thought that her father was worried about her, and now it turns out that perhaps he had been planning to kill her ever since she was a child. She remembered being a little girl and riding on the carousel, and the Count was waiting for her. How her father later, under the pretext that it was still cool, gave her hot tea. How he later introduced her to Henry. The Countess kept trying to understand why he wanted to kill her. Perhaps she had even been deceived by everyone, Ed and Renee. Her Grace knew she was on the brink of death, and now that she had been reborn, she would surely know why her father wanted to kill her. She knew she could survive. That was what she needed to endure now. The father raised his voice and asked if she was listening to him. The girl came out of her reverie and apologized. The man relaxed and said it was okay and suggested they go get something to eat. The daughter agreed, smiling sweetly. While tasting the steak, the Count said that the maid had said she had cried the night before. He asked her what was wrong. Irina apologized for causing concern, and explained that she had simply had a nightmare the previous night. His Excellency angrily slammed his fist on the table at the word nightmare. The girl looked up at him and he coughed into his fist in embarrassment after his outburst. The Countess rested her chin on her crossed fingers and explained with an innocent face that the nightmare had kept her from stopping crying. At this moment, a servant approached. Bowing, he apologized and reminded that there was very little time left. The master needed to be ready. Having said that he was coming now, the Count stood up and headed for the exit. Irina was left alone with her thoughts. She tried to understand what to do now. A little later, a blonde approached the gazebo. Going inside, she asked if everything was okay with her sister. Irina invited Renee to the table, mentally asking if she knew about her father's plans. The blonde began to devour the cakes with gusto. Pouring tea into a cup, Irina sympathetically noted that her sister had to go to the royal palace today, and because of her she couldn't get enough sleep. Irina wondered if she really didn't know anything, but she replied that the priest had acquired this tea in the kingdom of Henna. The younger sister noted that this was to be expected from their dad, since he was so worried about his sister. Irina suggested having some tea. Renee excitedly asked if she could really drink it. Irina replied that of course she could, but the blonde noticed that Dad would then scold her, because the tea must be very expensive. Irina then suggested that they share the tea. Renee asked again if it was really possible. Looking at her sister, Irina thought that her father was slowly killing her every day. Walking with a servant along the corridors of the palace, the Count thought that Irina should not see dreams. It is bad. She needs to drink more dandelion tea. At the end of the corridor, he saw his youngest daughter waving at him. The girl asked if he was leaving already and hugged her father. The Count asked where she had been. Renee replied that she had gone to see her sister before going to the royal palace. The Count asked if she had had tea with her sister in the morning. The girl said that this was the same aroma of tea that her sister drank. She shared it with her. The Count grabbed his daughter abruptly and began shaking her, urging her to spit it out quickly. The girl got scared and asked what was the matter. Even the servant intervened and asked the master to calm down. He was worried that he would hurt Renee. But the Count continued to shake his daughter and shouted her to spit out the tea quickly. Irina entered the room and asked what had happened. Her father shouted, asking why she had given her sister her tea to drink, to which the girl replied that this tea was good for the body, and then asked why Renee couldn't drink it. The Count began to mumble something, but then Renee said that she had not drunk that tea. The father shook his youngest daughter again, asking if it was true that she had not drunk it. The girl confirmed. Irina asked why they were making such a fuss. What was so special about this tea? The father replied that this tea was exclusively for unhealthy people. It was only suitable for her, and therefore only she could drink it. Irina replied that she understood, and then said that she was tired and was returning to the room. As soon as the eldest daughter disappeared behind the door, the Count told the youngest never to touch Irina's mug again. In the Raincars family, generation after generation, people with different abilities are born. But Irina did not show any skills. As she stepped out onto the balcony, the Countess was still wondering why she had to die. After all, her father devotedly adored and looked after her, even though she had no abilities. At least she thought so, but this trust killed her. Her husband said that she had the most powerful supernatural abilities of the whole family. Henry came out onto the balcony and said that he heard about her seizure during the night, and she refused to call him. Irina looked at her husband with a distant look, and then asked if he shouldn't be worried about her first, since he was a doctor. Henry pressed his hand to his chest. He replied that his heart sank when he learned that she had suffered and cried in the middle of the night. The girl lowered her eyes. If Irina had not returned to life, she would have had that same naive expression on her face again, and would have been fooled again. Henry sympathetically wished he had been there for her. He didn't want her to suffer alone. The girl hugged herself in an attempt to warm herself. The man came up and hugged her, escorting her into the room. He offered to turn on the fireplace. Irina said that she was fine, and then added that she was offended by him. Her Grace sat down on the sofa, and her husband knelt down next to her. The man asked again in surprise. The Countess replied that it had been so long since she had had a nightmare that she felt herself becoming unstable. Henry looked at her sympathetically and asked about the nightmare. The girl replied that it really was a real nightmare. Irina took her husband's face in her palms and leaned almost close to him. Her ladyship asked if he could hear her. The man gently took her head in his hands and replied that of course he could. Initially, something like this would never have happened between a physician and an aristocrat's daughter. Henry said that he had done well in medical school, but even after graduation he remained a commoner. Surely, even that seemed wonderful to Irina at the time. While folding the blanket, the Countess said it was funny. Her husband asked in surprise what exactly. He wondered if she was trying to play a joke on him. The girl smiled and said that she was very happy when she was near him. Then she apologized for lying to him when she said that she was scared. Henry relaxed and noticed that his wife had been surprising him all day. But he didn't mind. Every prank she did only made him laugh. Her Excellency closed her eyes. Her husband does not yet know that that stupid and naive Irina is no more. Recently, the Duke of Lancaster made the unthinkable announcement that he would marry anyone who would spend the night with him. Thus, he turned the entire empire on its ears. Henry, leaning on the armrests of the sofa, now understood what kind of scroll lay next to his wife. He said that now the whole capital is talking exclusively about this duke, and he added that only a shameless woman would agree to spend the night with him. But he was surprised that Irina was interested in something like that. The Countess replied that she had simply heard rumors. She reread the letter again and thought about it. The Duke of Lancaster is the Emperor's nephew and the Crown Prince's cousin. The whole empire has heard of his eccentricities. Rumor has it that he was kidnapped as a baby, and has been mad ever since. Her ladyship was brought out of her thoughts by her husband's question. He asked her to tell about her dream. The girl understood that both Henry and her father were worried about these dreams. It was an old memory, so Irina had completely forgotten about it. The events of that day came back to her mind. René's power is to prolong life. Compared to his sister's power, Ed's ability was weak, but he also had a special gift. Namely, he could accelerate the internal growth of a person, like roses growing in winter. Irina's ability is to appear to her father in his dreams. This happened every night. She couldn't help but think about Ian Lancaster. The girl clutched the letter in her hands. Perhaps fate itself had given her this chance. Looking up at her husband, the Countess replied that it was nothing special. Irina suggested leaving these conversations and going for a walk. Henry was surprised. Her ladyship wanted to do this in secret from her father. After all, sitting all the time in the mansion, she felt like she was suffocating from the stuffiness. Thoughtfully scratching his chin, the husband said that the Count was simply worried about her, to which the girl confidently replied that if Henry was with her, her father would not object. Then the Countess noticed that her father was not himself in the morning, so she thought maybe she should cheer him up with a small gift. Henry was even more surprised. Irina, approaching her husband and looking into his eyes, suggested buying classical literature because her father loved to read. The husband noted with disappointment that it was expensive, but the wife crossed her arms pleadingly and said not to worry. She had money. And at the same time they will be able to find him some kind of magical artifact. The man buried his face in his wife's hair and said that if that was the case, then he had no objection, and suggested that they wait for him at the gate while he prepared a carriage for them. Irina shouted after him to be careful. The girl thought to herself that there would be no second chance. She had to meet the Duke. The wheels of the carriage rhythmically tapped on the stone pavement of the capital, and streets and buildings floated past the window. The Countess suggested going to a bookstore first, and then asked her husband if he knew about the labyrinth. Henry asked again. Irina asked him what surprised him so much, because she wanted to visit the bookstore in the labyrinth. Then she giggled a little and asked if he was thinking of something vulgar. The husband denied it. The girl replied that she had heard that it was her father's favorite store. She didn't know if it was really in the red light district, but the shop was quite famous among gentlemen. Her ladyship suggested that perhaps they could find something worthwhile there. Besides, The labyrinth was close to the mage's quarter. Henry confirmed that she was right. The Countess added that she had a good feeling. The main thought in Irina's head was, to survive at any cost. This would be her greatest revenge on her husband. The husband replied that in truth, he knew one bookstore in the labyrinth, because that was where he met the Count. During his student years, he had no money, so he decided to go there. Irina noticed that this was unexpected, and she herself was interested in what the Count and the young man studying medicine could need in the labyrinth. Seeing half-naked women by the walls, the girl realized that they were almost there. The carriage stopped and the coachman headed towards the doors to open them, but the Countess was ahead of him. She was the first to open the door with all her might, so that the coachman fell backwards from the force of the blow. Jumping out of the carriage, Irina rushed down the street. Henry, who came out after her, only managed to shout out her name. She ran as fast as she could and was only able to catch her breath when she hid behind one of the buildings. Against the background of the arch, the girl saw the silhouette of a boy. He called her and said that he would help. Approaching the hatch in the floor, the guy tried to open it. Not far away, the girl heard her husband's voice approaching, calling her. The boy opened the hatch and began to hurry her. Irina followed him. People rushed past, but no one noticed the fugitive. Irina found herself underground in some catacombs. She clutched her head, trying to figure out where she was. This boy was standing next to her, his hand in his shorts pocket. The boy called himself Tom. He said that they had gone down into the sewers and asked not to worry. Her Grace looked around. Water underfoot, an unpleasant smell, mold on the walls. Tom said that she would owe him 2 silver coins. That would be payment for his help. Irina, still sitting in the drain, looked up at him. The boy noticed her dirty clothes. After examining the things, the Countess tore off a button with precious stones from the dress. The girl handed it to Tom and offered to take it. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. He even asked her again if she was sure. Irina confirmed it. The button shone with all the colors of the rainbow. But then her ladyship added that before that she would like to ask for one more thing. The boy asked what exactly. The Countess asked to be taken to the Hotel Martel. She decided that she would never die for nothing. Tom couldn't take his eyes off the shining jewel. Then he offered to follow him. He led Irina through the corridors of the sewer. The hem of her dress was tangled in the water. The girl felt weak. She sat down to rest for a bit. The guy extended his hand, offering to help since it was dark there. The Countess thanked him and took his hand. A little later, Tom said that they would soon see lanterns. He explained that this was a patrol route for the guards, so they had to hurry. Still holding the girl's hand, he asked her why she was going to the hotel. Irina replied that she wanted to meet someone. At this time, sitting on the sofa, Ian Lancaster wondered if people were talking about him. He knew that there were many women in the capital who liked him. He considered it ungentlemanly to pretend that he didn't notice the attention from women. A young man named Hugh, a personal assistant, warned him that he should be careful. In the sewers, Tom pointed to the door and said that they had arrived. She only had to go up the stairs and the hotel would be right across the street. Irina thanked the boy and gave him the precious button. The boy looked with delight at the play of the facets of the precious stone. As she left, the Countess said that the button was worth at least 1 gold coin. Then she added that her name was Irina Raincars. Tom was surprised to hear this name. The girl reassured him, promising that she would not tell anyone about it. She assumed that the boy himself knew how valuable this button was. If someone took it from him, he would hardly be able to buy it back for a fair price. Putting her hands on Tom's shoulders, the Countess asked if he would like to help her any further. In that case, he will never wander in the darkness of the drains again. The boy asked in surprise if this was true. Irina replied that at least this way she would be able to offer him much more than just 1 button. The boy asked what he needed to do. Her ladyship replied that she needed to steal someone for 1 night today, and she needed help. At this time, Henry was looking for the Countess on the streets of the city. He did not understand where she had disappeared to. Seeing a woman in a similar dress, the blonde rushed towards her and grabbed her hand. The woman asked sharply what he wanted. She looked nothing like her ladyship. Realizing he had made a mistake, Henry apologized. The words of a song were playing in Irina's head. Close your eyes. The darkness will retreat and the stars will bloom. When the moon hides you, step into the shadows. The girl couldn't understand where this song came from. She assumed that perhaps her mother sang it to her. To enhance his family's abilities, the Count married a woman he did not love and had children with her. At the very beginning, Irina's illness was similar to her mother's illness, from which the latter died. While waiting for Tom, the Countess mentally returned to the past. In her memories, her mother looked different. The boy climbed up from the sewers into the city. He headed for the Martel Hotel. He hesitated a bit in front of the hotel, then carefully opened the door. The receptionist was a bald man. Tom apologized and said that his mistress wanted to spend the night with the most handsome man here. In exchange, she offers a precious button. The administrator carefully examined the clasp and put it in his pocket. After grumbling about what times we live in, that some rich lady would come to a godforsaken hotel, he gave the boy the key to the room. Tom clutched the key to himself as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. Hugh was watching the price from the reception desk on the upper balcony. Some time later, Irina was brought back from her memories by someone's touch. Someone wrapped her shoulders in a shawl. The Countess looked around and saw Tom. He asked if she was okay. Leaning against the wall, Irina replied that she just needed to rest. She asked him to sit down next to her. The boy offered her a bottle of liquid. The Countess asked what it was. Tom replied that he had bought the milk with the money she had given him the day before. He gave one bottle to his sister and brought the second one to her. Irina was surprised that he decided to give her his share. This may have been the first time a stranger had been kind to her. The girl thanked him and said she wouldn't refuse. Handing her the bottle, Tom asked what she was going to do when she met this man. Irina thoughtfully replied that she was going to change her life. The boy asked if it could be done so easily. Her ladyship replied that it was possible that she might not succeed, but it was much better than sitting on her hands. Tom took out the key and handed it to the Countess. Irina said that all that was left was to wait until night. As dusk fell, they walked out into the city and headed towards the back entrance of the hotel. Seeing men talking through the window, the boy suggested entering through the front door. Irina changed her hat for a hooded cape. Putting her hand on Tom's shoulder, she noted that he did not have to go with her. The Countess added that he should take the button to the Duke of Lancaster in 2 days, and that he should not forget to take his sister. The boy replied that it was good. Waving goodbye, Her Grace asked for prayers for her success. She entered the hotel and found her room number 306. Opening the door with a key, Irina went inside. The door of number 305 immediately opened and the Duke of Lancaster came out. He asked his assistant if he was really going to be kidnapped today. Hugh asked if that was what he was waiting for. Ian thought about it, then wanted to know if he had seen her face. The assistant replied that the girl had sent her servant. The Duke closed his eyes dreamily. He couldn't wait to see what kind of girl would come to him. In the next room, Irina looked out the window, illuminated by the moonlight. She took off her hood. Her red hair fell down her back. She understood that this was her only chance, and she hoped that everything would be fine. Ian was relaxing in a hot bath with rose petals. Holding a glass of wine, he was telling the unknown lady into the void that he was ready to spend the night with her. He was interested in the question of whether she was ready. Coming out of the bath, he put on a robe and lay down on the bed. Suddenly, a red-haired girl in a short negligee came out from behind the curtain. The man asked who she was. The lady asked if he could see her. The Duke moved back to the head of the bed as she sat down on the couch. He told her not to come any closer. Pulling her legs up onto the bed and sitting on her knees, the redhead asked again if he could see her. The man answered that he could clearly, and once again he asked who she was. The girl approached and climbed on top of him. Ian asked warily what she was up to. The lady asked again if he could see her. The Duke asked angrily why she kept repeating the same thing. She must be some kind of mad woman. The redhead asked if he knew where they were. The man replied that they were on his bed. The girl replied that it was not at all. Somehow they had been transported to the forest and their feet were sinking into the grass. She said that it was his dream. Sometime before this, the Duke put on warm pajamas, lit the best scented candles, and lay down in a comfortable bed. Having prepared all this, the man closed his eyes. Ian did not suffer from insomnia, but nevertheless, his night was stolen from him. It was a girl he had never seen before who did it, and with the help of a shining sphere she transported them to the forest. The Duke asked if it was really his dream. The house was visible through the trees. He asked again if he was really dreaming. The redhead confirmed. The man sat down in the grass and picked some flowers. Looking at them, Ian couldn't believe that he was actually sleeping. He even wished he could fly into the sky. Leaning towards him, the lady said that if she became stronger, he could do it. Lancaster could only gasp. Suddenly, they found themselves on the shore of a lake. A full moon shone in the sky, illuminating the surface of the water. Glowing butterflies flapped their wings around them. The Duke threw off his robe and began to enter the water. The surprised girl asked what he was doing. She said the water was too cold to swim in. The man replied that they were in a dream, so it made no difference. He scooped up the clear water from the lake with his palms and washed his face. It was incredible. The redhead watched him on the shore with excitement. The man dove under the water. Fish swam around and the moonlight shone through the water. Irina felt her hands shaking and realized that her body was weakening. Looking at the sky, she noticed that the landscape was disappearing. She had little time left. She must persuade the Duke to marry her before he wakes up. The Countess massaged her forehead. The girl knew she would have to tell him who she was. She entered the water. Approaching the man, the Countess said that it was time for her to return. But he did not react to her, so she grabbed his hand and asked him to listen when they talked to him. Lancaster asked absent-mindedly what was going on. Then he remembered that he needed to get dressed. Even if it was a dream, he felt awkward being like this. Irina didn't understand what he was talking about. The Countess noticed that she was also naked. This surprised her greatly. She wondered if she had really come to him naked in his dream. Frightened, her Grace covered her chest with her hand, but the Duke was already looking sideways at her. Irina shouted that he was a pervert. The man laughed and noticed that this was being said to him by the girl who came to him without clothes. Her ladyship was indignant and shouted that he should never wake up. Ian thanked her. Irina's strength began to leave her. She understood that she had to tell him her name. The lady only heard his voice, which said that her body was disappearing. Could it really have happened? The Duke was brought out of sleep by the unpleasant sensation on his face and Hugh's voice. He opened his eyes and rubbed his cheek. Ian wondered if the assistant had slapped him. The man asked if his lordship was all right. He was worried and was about to go for a doctor. Lancaster replied that he had seen a dream. The assistant asked if it was a hallucination. When the Duke is overtired, he resorts to medication. He falls asleep only with their help. Some of them contain a lot of narcotic components. It's hard to call it sleep. Rather, he falls unconscious. Because of this, he occasionally sees hallucinations, confusing them with real life. Sitting more comfortably on the bed, Ian said not to make him laugh. It really was a dream. He wondered who the woman was. Hugh insisted it was a side effect of the drug. Lancaster got angry and said he was ashamed of his assistant. The man asked if the Duke was ashamed for once. His lordship smiled at the memory of the beautiful stranger. The assistant was surprised to see Ian smiling. The Duke walked to the window and abruptly opened the curtains. Looking out over the sunny city, Lancaster felt cheerful. It was the first time he felt rested after sleep. Ian turned his face to the sun and smiled. Hugh cautiously noted that if the gentleman had killed a man, he had better tell right away. Given the side effects of the drug, he wouldn't be surprised if the Duke did something like that. Completely dejected, the assistant asked if everything was really all right with the gentleman. A joyful Ian turned around and asked to bring him the woman with whom he had spent the night. At dawn, Irina woke up in her room number 306. She was overcome with shame. She showed her body to the man she met for the first time. The girl swung her legs off the bed. Besides, she hadn't achieved her goal. The Countess looked sadly out the window. In the morning, she will have to go home. If her father finds out about this, he will lock her in her room forever. She will be like a bird locked in a cage. Irina put on a hooded cape and left the room. Walking through the hotel corridors, she decided that this was her destiny. Returning home to the castle, Her Grace met her father for breakfast, at which her sister and brother were also present. The man, swirling a glass of wine in his hand, thoughtfully asked if she had really spent the night with Henry. Standing at the other end of the table laden with food, Irina, in a red dress, asked again. The Count replied that 2 days ago the maid had told him that she had been waiting for her in the room, but she had never returned. The girl said indignantly that this was nonsense. She would never do such a thing, and her father knew it. His lordship put his glass on the table and said that he had decided to move her wedding forward. Irina was indignant. She said that Henry was a good man, but that did not mean that she wanted to marry him. Did her father really think she could have spent the night with him? The Count angrily noted that someone had seen her and Henry in the labyrinth. The truth is of no use to anyone. Honor is more important to an aristocrat than life, and she has tarnished it. The daughter asked if no one really needed the truth. Then she asked where Henry himself was. His lordship did not answer. He told her to go to her room and think about her behavior. Then he added that his daughter must marry Henry before the end of spring. Pressing her hand to her chest, Irina exclaimed that this was all. The man slammed his fist on the table and asked why they had gone into the labyrinth and slept outside the house. The father angrily said that the Count's daughter should not act like that. She must take responsibility for her actions. The Countess shouted loudly that Henry had lied to him. She would never do such vulgar things to him. His Excellency propped up his head and remarked that the doctor was a good man. He was the one she was missing. The girl asked him if he really thought the daughter of Count Rheinkars and a commoner's doctor were a good match. She decided that this might bring her father to his senses. Henry, who came up at that moment, asked everyone to calm down, because the lady needed peace. Irina noticed that Henry had arrived just in time. She asked him to tell her what had happened that day. The blonde scratched his chin thoughtfully and replied that there was no need for them to hide the events of that day. He should apologize for not noticing her feelings earlier. His grin said that who would have thought that a noble lady could do something like that? Irina thought that she was in hell. The girl sadly lowered her head. She did not want to see anything. Only the sound of the rain broke this minute of silence in the dining room. Suddenly, Henry came up to her, took her hand and kissed her wrist. Aiden and Renee were shocked. Irina suddenly pulled her hand away and screamed what he was doing. The blonde man with an unhappy face replied that every night he saw her suffering from a fever, balancing between life and death. He wanted to ease her suffering. Henry knelt before her and told her that he had fallen in love with her at first sight. He lifted her foot and kissed her slipper. Irina removed her foot and asked what he was planning. She is the eldest daughter of the Rheinkarns family. Every man is ready to sacrifice anything just to kiss her foot. The whole family froze in anticipation. The Countess indignantly pushed the doctor away with her foot and rose from her chair. Henry landed on his butt. The girl looked down on him, her arms crossed under her chest. The eyes of the entire family were on her. The Count slammed his hand on the table and shouted that he had not raised her properly. Irina snapped back, saying that he had not raised her at all. Her father treated her like a doll. His lordship replied that she knew why, because she was in poor health. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and said that she was wrong when she thought that he loved her. The man smiled a little and said that he loved her very much. The Countess thought it was so hypocritical. Even after going back in time, she hoped that her family wasn't that bad, that her father really cares about her. But now all her hopes have gone to pieces. No one needs her. The Count approached his daughter and gently took her hand. The daughter freed her hand and said, shaking her finger, that she would not marry Henry. The father asked what else she could do, and he thought with annoyance why this idiot had to shout his daughter's name all over the street. Henry rose to his feet and walked over to Irina. He asked if she had forgotten about the events of that night. The girl shouted at him to stop lying. No one asked him to intervene. At this moment, the door to the dining room opened and a guest came in. This man was clearly displeased. He asked why the servants in this house were so slow. It was Duke Ian of Lancaster himself, in full regalia. Catching Irina's eye, he waved and greeted the lady. Then he added that he would have liked to sleep longer, but it was a pity that he had been awakened. The entire Count's family stared at him in surprise. His lordship greeted the Count and said it was a pleasure to meet him. He wondered if he had forgotten. They had met before. Rheinkars was mentally outraged that an uninvited guest had burst into someone else's dining room without warning. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Henry squeezed Irina's hand and suggested that she go into the room because she needed to rest. The girl thought about how strong his grip was. She tried to pull her hand away and screamed that it hurt. The Earl thought Henry was a fool, and Ian asked who he was. The blonde replied that he was her personal physician. His lordship removed Henry's hand from Irina. Then, coughing a little into his fist, he told the red-haired lady that she was very good at playing hide-and-seek. If it weren't for that guy, he would have had to search the entire capital. The Count intervened in the conversation. He turned to Lancaster and suggested that his daughter had caused him inconvenience. He did not know what she had done wrong, but promised to punish her without fail. The brunette was surprised. He asked if her father really wanted to punish her right away without even asking about what had happened. The Count asked again. Ian replied that he had offended the Countess. His father asked him what he meant. The Duke remarked that even though he had arrived unannounced, they would not make the guest stand. Rheinkars replied that they were having a family dispute. He promised to visit his lordship another day and asked him to leave. The Duke narrowed his eyes and asked if he was being driven away. He thought that if it weren't for Hugh's advice, he would have immediately taken Irina into his possessions. The Countess, frowning, told her father that it was enough. This man had come to her. Ian confirmed that he had come at Lady Irina's invitation, so he had no intention of submitting to the Earl. His lordship tried to say something, but Lancaster interrupted him. Putting his hands on the girl's shoulders, he said that Lady Irene was already of age, so he plans to dine with his daughter and spend another night with her. and he wondered why the Count was stopping them. The father angrily shouted what it meant. The brunette replied that he was not going to talk to him standing up, and if he heard correctly, he would like to inform you that his daughter spent the night not with that idiot doctor, but with him, Ian Lancaster. The Count said that this could not be. Irina turned to his lordship and noticed that he had arrived later than she had expected. The brunette replied that he had to admit that the Countess was too skilled in heels. Smiling, the girl hoped that he liked it. Outside the window a storm raged. Lightning flashed every now and then. His lordship turned to the Count and asked permission to marry his daughter. Henry indignantly said that he was her fiancé. Aidan, putting his hand on the doctor's shoulder, also confirmed that his sister already had a fiancé. Ian thought that the lady who would come to spend the night with him would be a strong girl, but apparently she wanted to break off her engagement, and he understood perfectly well why. Standing next to Irina and looking at these men, the Duke realized that they wanted to get rid of her. Young Rankars introduced himself to his lordship. The brunette extended his hand, saying that it was a pleasure to meet him. But Aidan ignored the offered greeting. Lancaster assumed that if this was the younger brother, then the second blonde man was her fiancé. The Countess, noticing the guest's hesitation, said that she had only learned of the proposal that morning. However, she had no intention of marrying him. The Duke answered thoughtfully, "That's how." Then the brother spoke up. He said that it was a family matter. Only the father could decide who would be Irina's fiancé. Ian, touching his nose, just chuckled. Aidan, turning on the caring brother, went up to his sister and, taking her hand, told her to go to the room with Henry. Her ladyship looked at her relative intently. She thought that he was exactly like his father. Her brother believes that she is obliged to marry the doctor, even if it means her death. Lancaster told him to let her go. Then he added that Aidan should know that his sister had mercilessly attacked him. Everyone looked at his lordship in surprise. The brother asked what he was talking about. The brunette, mysteriously scratching his chin, replied that he was talking about what happened when they spent the night together. After this event, he slept all day, frank and innocent, and he didn't even notice how long he hadn't opened his eyes. Addressing the Earl, Ian said that the reason he wanted to marry his daughter was because she had raped him and run away. Therefore, he asks for Irina's hand and heart so that she can answer for the deed she has committed. The father was surprised by what was said. It was unexpected to hear such a word from an aristocrat. It was very vulgar. The Duke, pointing to the doctor, added that if the Count was in his right mind, he would never marry his daughter to the doctor. And he added that besides, it was a good chance to become related to the Lancaster family. Then he asked what they would say. Irina watched the Duke with surprise and caution. She understood that he had something in mind. Ian Lancaster is an aristocrat who rules the lands in the north of the empire. The whole world knows that he is the son of His Majesty's sister. In addition to this, he casually announced to the emperor that he would marry anyone who could spend the night with him. And that's not the end of it. He is considered an unrivaled hero who wins wars with both monsters and humans. In other words, this is a man who surpasses any ideal. That is why the Countess chose him. The only thing she thought about was whether this was the right thing to do. Receiving no answer, the Duke inquired whether they might wish to go against the Lancaster family. Irina turned to the brunette. The man turned his head towards her and, calling her baby, asked what was going on. The girl replied that he should have discussed it with her first. She realized that it was too sudden a proposal. Of course, becoming the wife of the Duke of Lancaster is the easiest way out of the situation. However, she knew 2 examples of marriages with unloved people that ended sadly. The first was her mother, and the second was herself. Here the Count asked what his daughter had done. Irina shyly straightened her hair. She doesn't even have to guess what he's thinking. Most likely what a dumb daughter he has. She has to sort out both her elopement and this argument. Father didn't like what Lancaster was saying, so he asked him to leave immediately. The brunette replied that he would not leave his baby to someone who was not capable of taking care of his daughter. Rankars said that if the Duke did not listen, he would have to call the guards. Ian asked if the Earl had become richer than the Lancasters. He suggested that they approach His Majesty to determine the amount of compensation. His lordship is a dilettante, but he can see that the Count is far from being a loving father. The man asked him what he meant. The brunette asked what these jokes were about. Did his lordship really want to disgrace his daughter in front of the entire empire? Rankars replied that his daughter could not have done something like that. Ian replied that he had a witness, a boy who had received a button from Irina's clothes. Nevertheless, the Count repeated once more that his lordship should leave his house. Lancaster thought for a second, then said he would leave with Irina. He had no desire to linger here even for a second. The Emperor respected Count Reinkars. This was due to the abilities that the members of the Count's family possessed. The Countess had never seen a man who so openly opposed her father. She was shocked, but at the same time indescribably happy. The Duke looked closely at the girl and, smiling, asked if she agreed to leave with him. Reinkars shouted, "What nonsense!" Aiden went to the girl and took her by the shoulders. He told his sister to go back to her room. Brother noticed that she was losing her clear mind because of the drugs. Irina said that was enough and asked to let her go. Henry also tried to reason with Irina. His lordship watched the family closely. He said that it seemed that they could not be reached by normal language. Both blondes turned towards him, trying to figure out what he was going to do. Raising his hand and wiggling his fingers, Ian formed a magical ball in his palm that glowed brightly and released small bolts of lightning. Lancaster said he would then make them understand differently, and launched the sphere at them. Henry immediately began coughing. The doctor looked at his palm, which was covered in blood, in surprise. A small trickle of red liquid was also running down the corner of his lips. Aiden asked him sympathetically what was wrong. The Duke smiled and told him to stay out of the way. The Count looked confused and a little frightened. He asked what his lordship's intentions were. The brunette calmly replied that he was going to pick up his bride. His assistant told him to be polite when meeting the Count, but after seeing how this family treated Irina, he lost all desire to follow his advice. His lordship said that it was a family matter, to which the Duke calmly replied that that was why he was going to become a member of their family. The Count indignantly said that he would never accept into the family a duke who did not have even the slightest idea of manners. Ian advised them not to jump to conclusions. He intended to show them a man without manners. And grabbing Reinkars by the throat, his lordship said menacingly that they should not underestimate him. His lordship croaked that he would not get away with it. The Duke grinned and asked what would happen to him. He noticed that the Count's youngest daughter was on good terms with the Emperor's son. Ian wondered if her power lay in healing or in conception. Then he leaned towards the Earl and added that she could bring the dead back to life. And he asked if it was true. The man recoiled a little, asked if he was making fun of his family. Lancaster calmly assumed that the Earl himself knew where he would go for such treatment of his daughter. And pointing his finger at the Count, Ian added that it seemed the Reinkars family was involved in illegal activities. It was the first time he had seen such rotten people. He spent a long time looking for Irina outside the city. He and Hugh stayed up for 2 nights to find their damned mansion, and the very thought of it infuriates him. The Count asked dejectedly what his wish was. The brunette repeated what he had said earlier. He wanted a wedding with his daughter. The father asked for time to think it over. Lancaster said no, because he could not live a day without Irina. His lordship replied that in that case he was forced to refuse. The guest suggested doing something different. He suggested that the owner of the house use his famous abilities on him. The man angrily shouted that his lordship was simply making fun of him. The brunette repeated once again that he promised to marry anyone who would spend the night with him, and that girl turned out to be Irina Reinkars. Renee rose from her chair and slammed her hands down on the table. She exclaimed that her sister could not have done anything like that. Ian, gently touching the red-haired lady's shoulder, noticed that it seemed like they didn't believe him, so he offered to tell her everything herself. Renee was the daughter her father loved the most. She had the strongest ability in the history of the Reinkars family. She is the prince's beloved. The things Irina couldn't get no matter how hard she tried, Renee got with a snap of her fingers. Looking at her family, the Countess said it was true. She had slept with the Duke, not Henry. She had sneaked into his room and spent the night with him. The whole family was shocked by her statement. The sister covered her mouth with her hand in horror. The father exclaimed loudly. Henry, holding the bloody napkin, asked Irina to calm down. He noticed that she didn't love his lordship. The girl was ready to become a lady the world had never seen before if it would help her survive. She replied that she dreamed of becoming the Duchess of Lancaster. The doctor said he hadn't thought she was so cheap. The Countess looked at him intently. The blonde had no right to say such things. It wasn't her he loved, but her family. Henry pretended to get her family's wealth. Day after day, slowly but surely, he killed his wife. And after that, he still has the audacity to consider her cheap. Renee reached out to her and asked her to think better of it. She couldn't understand how her sister could sleep with a stranger. Perhaps she wanted to discredit the Reinkars family. Aiden supported his younger sister and said that it was not too late to return to the family. Irina asked how the fact that she wanted to marry the Duke could bring shame on their family. She reminded her sister that she herself was going to marry a prince, so wasn't it cruel to say such things about her desire to marry a Lancaster? Tears welled up in Renee's eyes. Wiping the drops that ran down her cheeks, the blonde said that she knew how much her sister loved Henry. Then, waving her hand, she added that Irina would certainly regret having been fooled by the Duke. The Countess looked down and asked when she had said that she loved the doctor. Then, looking at her sister, she asked her, "Does she really think that she will be happier if she marries a commoner doctor than if she marries a respected Duke?" Wiping away tears, Renee replied that she didn't think so. She just wanted her sister to be happy. The father asked his youngest daughter if everything was okay with her. The blonde sadly replied that everything was fine, but her sister seemed out of her mind. Relatives surrounded the crying girl, comforting her. Ian quietly remarked to Irina that they could finally talk alone. He was very glad that he could meet her again. The girl thanked him for finding her. She thought that if he hadn't come, her family would have forced her to marry Henry. His lordship chuckled a little, remembering the unforgettable night. The Countess smiled, noticing that the brunette seemed to remember every detail. The man replied that, of course, he would never forget his future wife. His face changed, making the girl a little wary. She thought he looked very strange. Perhaps she had made a mistake. The brunette grabbed his head and cursed. He remembered that Hugh had told him to introduce himself first. He needed to improve. The Duke looked into the red-haired lady's eyes and formally stated his name. Extending his hand, he said that he had come to accept her proposal of marriage. Irina considered for a moment whether she should take his hand. She looked back at her family, who were comforting Renee, and realized that there was no place for her in their hearts. The Countess was used to seeing things like this, used to this loneliness, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. She clenched her fists in frustration. There was no place for her in this family. Ian waved his hand in front of her eyes, reminding her that he was still waiting. Her ladyship looked up at him and apologized. As she extended her hand to him, she realized that she was even ready to drink poison, just so as not to be here anymore. Giving her full name, Irina thanked the Duke for accepting her offer. The man, squeezing her hand, replied that the feeling was mutual. Lancaster said he was rich. He also had large holdings, not to mention mines and diamond veins. Kissing her fingers, he asked her if she liked the property. The Countess did not understand what he was talking about. She thought bitterly that his lordship was really one of those who boasted about money. But the brunette immediately clarified that he meant whether she needed to take anything from this poor man's hovel. The girl replied that she needed to think about it. Lancaster smiled and added that a guy named Tom and his sister were currently with him. Irina thought that if she needed to take anything, it would be the necklace that she always wears in memory of her mother. But out loud she said that she didn't need anything from here. Ian replied that in that case they could go. Taking her hand, his lordship suggested that they leave. Renee covered her mouth with her hand in fear. The Earl turned menacingly to his eldest daughter. He said that if she went with Lancaster, he would banish her from the Rencars family. Her father asked her if she really intended to marry the man who had insulted her brother. Irina replied, without letting go of the brunette's hand, that she would become the Duchess of Lancaster. The man said that she should not do that. The girl asked why. She is the eldest daughter of the Count and wants to marry this man. The Count shouted. Did she really want to announce to the entire empire that she had sneaked into his bedroom? To marry for such a base reason is a disgrace to the Count's family. Henry extended his hand to her ladyship. He asked her to leave the Duke and promised to take all her sins upon himself. The blonde said they could pay priests to ask God to forgive her. Irina looked at him, and in her head there was only one word: lie. Father probably knew that it was not true, too. Otherwise, he would not have told this story to the Duke. The Count tried to appeal to his daughter again, but she refused. She was sure that with time her father would understand her decision. After all, he always gave her what she wanted. She asked for a blessing for their wedding because she wanted to live in luxury like her sister. The Countess decided that she had to pretend to be a stupid, capricious, and self-centered noble lady. In this case, they themselves will want her to leave the house and will not even try to stop her. Ian pressed his hand to his chest and asked her not to frighten him like that. He had thought she would listen to this old earl. He took her hand and led her out of the palace. It was raining heavily outside. The Duke asked if she had taken all her things. Irina answered positively. Then the man asked him to wait there while he brought an umbrella. The girl turned around and walked under the streams of rain. She wanted to leave as soon as possible. Ian took off his jacket and hung it over their heads. He wondered if they had made her so angry. Then he added that no matter how much they threatened him, he would not leave her. So there was no need to hurry, otherwise she would catch a cold. Approaching the carriage, Lancaster shouted to the coachman to open the door quickly. The man suggested that Irina eat first in the carriage. The Countess thanked him as she walked up the steps. She realized that she was finally free. Scenes from the previous conversation flashed before her eyes. What her sister Henry, her father, had said. At this time the Duke turned and looked intently at the Count's palace. The coachman asked if everything was okay, and suggested that they quickly get into the carriage, since the gentleman was completely wet. Ian muttered thoughtfully that it would be hard for the fire to get going in this rain. The driver apologized and asked if his lordship really intended to do this. Lancaster replied that it was. The servant suggested that perhaps the master would change his mind after all. But before he could finish speaking, the Duke snapped his fingers and the palace exploded. But the rain really did stop the fire from spreading. The men watched the water extinguish the flames. His lordship remarked with annoyance that the rain had spoiled everything, but he promised to come back here again on a clear day and burn everything here to the ground. After the gentleman climbed into the carriage, the coachman jumped onto the box and spurred the horses. Ian asked the lady if she was cold. The girl said she was fine, but in reality it was different. Perhaps it was the relief she felt when she left the mansion. But from that moment on she was shaking all over. Or maybe she still hasn't recovered from using her power. Irina noticed that the Duke had started to undress. She asked him what he was doing. The man told her not to be modest. Taking off his shirt, he said that the Countess would find out now. The girl watched in embarrassment as his lordship was left with a naked torso. She understood that the Duke was a very unusual person. But to deal with such a thing immediately after leaving, covering her head with a shirt, Ian told her that she needed to dry herself off to warm up a bit. He began to gently pat her hair dry. His movements were rough but very gentle. Not at all like Henry's. But that's no reason to undress. Irina sincerely thanked him and, still embarrassed, replied that she really did feel warmer. Hugh was looking through the papers in his office. Suspicions that the Raincars family was involved in various illegal activities were confirmed. The question arose whether this applied to the young lady. After all, the lady who spent the night with Ian was the potential savior of the Lancaster family. Only she communicates with the Wild Duke in a human way. The assistant heard the sound of approaching hooves. He hoped that the negotiations had been successful, and that the Raincars family had nothing to oppose to his lordship. Hugh must meet his future mistress. The assistant went down to meet the master. As soon as the carriage arrived, he asked the coachman if everything was okay with the lady. The driver replied worriedly that no. According to the Duke's story, she might die. The carriage door opened and a half-naked gentleman came out. Hugh asked what it all meant and why the master was naked. Lancaster smiled and said that his assistant was very noisy. Then he added that a lot had happened. The brown-haired man was horrified. The gentleman said that he would go for the Countess and left in high spirits. But since he took off his clothes, they might be stained with blood. This could only mean that he had brought a corpse with him. Hugh began to panic. Sooner or later the truth would come out. He didn't know what to do now. Even a duke is not allowed to kill an earl's daughter. His lordship will definitely go to prison. It turns out that Hugh is serving a criminal. He pounced on the Duke, asking him why he had killed the Count's daughter. After all, he had told him to restrain himself. Ian asked what he was talking about. He'd better call a doctor. A girl appeared from the carriage. Lancaster offered her his hand, helping her down. Hugh was glad that the Countess was alive. Irina leaned on her arm as she stepped out of the carriage. The brown-haired man asked the Duke again why he was undressed. The man did not understand what the problem was. Hugh was surprised to realize that the gentleman had taken off his clothes to keep the bride warm. Ian confirmed and explained that it had been raining, and the lady was still shivering. The assistant was still surprised by the Duke's actions. He did not believe that he could be so kind. Lancaster noticed that Irina's hands were cold as ice. The girl replied that she would get better when she rested. His lordship said that it would not do. He picked up the Countess in his arms. She was not expecting it, so she said to let her go. But Ian asked for a little patience. The mansion is too big, so it will be faster this way. Hugh was once again surprised by the gentleman's behavior. He admitted that he was very capricious. The Duke practically ran the red-haired lady into the palace. Irina grumbled that she was already warm and there was no need for him to carry her. His lordship looked at her tenderly and said that he would take the girl to her room. He asked her to relax because he was very nimble. The Countess was interested in the question of whether he could be trusted. In this life, she must not let her guard down. The servants at the palace asked the Duke to wait outside. Leaning languidly against the wall, still undressed, Ian asked why. The servant replied that the lady was changing her clothes. The Duke smiled and replied that that was exactly the point. But the servant asked to respect the personal boundaries of others. He is not an animal. By the way, it wouldn't hurt for him to get dressed either. The man did not give up and did not understand what the problem was. He had already seen everything before. The servant pointed to the door and replied that if he did not leave, the lady might escape. The Duke, flexing his biceps, dejectedly remarked that the Countess was really not pleased to see his naked body. The butler asked back whether the lady had said she wanted to see him. Lancaster asked what the difference was. The guy closed his eyes tiredly and replied that he himself would prefer not to see. The maid asked Irina if she wanted to see the Duke's body. The girl replied that she did not. His lordship thoughtfully asked why not. The maid clutched her head in helplessness as it had already begun to hum. She nevertheless asked once again, be that as it may, for the Duke to come outside. Lancaster, looking offended, headed for the door. But near it he stopped and looked back. The servants were blocking the Countess with a wall. Having shouted at the master to finally leave, the servant also took his leave. As he was leaving, he said that if the guest had any questions, she could ask them to the headmaid, Emma. The worker bowed and said that she was at the lady's service. Irina thought about it because she had not yet said that she would marry Ian. There was a knock on the door, and after permission to enter, a bunch of maids came in. They lined up and said they were pleased to meet their mistress. The girls offered to help her change. The Countess was surprised that they called her mistress, as if it were a matter of course. She realized that there was no turning back. Her Highness had finally been changed. The maids reported that they had selected the best outfit so that she could enjoy her rest. Irina looked at herself in the mirror with admiration. She praised her outfit. Pointing to the bed, Emma suggested that they rest after a long journey. The Countess sat down on the bed. She decided that she really could use some rest. The maid immediately served tea with lemon. She assumed that it would help the lady warm up. When Irina took the cup and took a sip, there was a knock on the door. She allowed them to enter. A young man wearing glasses entered the room. He greeted everyone and introduced himself as the Baron, the Duke's personal physician. He asked what was troubling her ladyship. Irina shuddered unconsciously, remembering her bitter experience with Dr. Henry. She thought it was ironic to be killed by the one who was supposed to save lives. The Countess was sure she couldn't trust that either. The Baron took out a thermometer and asked permission to take the girl's temperature. She agreed. When the doctor checked her, he saw a slight fever. The man said he needed to observe her for a while to prescribe medicine. He added that Her Highness would feel better if she had a good rest. Then he asked if she had any chronic illnesses or allergies. Irina said no. She couldn't relax. She was finally free from the Raincars family's clutches. The Countess must not reveal her feelings to anyone, nor the fact that this is her second life. However, it is unlikely that anyone will believe her. She might even be considered crazy. The girl looked at the doctor and asked if he needed anything else. The Baron replied that he had not. He simply wanted to greet her. It was an honor to meet the lady. Hugh had told him a lot about the Countess. The man bowed and asked Emma to add ginger to her lemon tea. It would help her warm up. When leaving, the doctor said that he would be nearby and could be called at any time. Outside in the corridor, Lancaster was waiting for him in disguise. He asked if the inspection was over. The Baron replied that the lady had a fever. What she needed now was not medicine but a good rest. He was a little upset, having finally expected to work. The doctor said he would be in the next room. The Duke replied that he could do whatever he wanted. Ian entered the room and approached Irina. He said that he had been waiting for this for a long time and asked to let him admire her. Her ladyship, when she first saw Lancaster, thought he was a villain. Emma, turning to the gentleman, noted that patients with a fever should rest as much as possible. Then she asked the Countess if she would be able to rest if the Duke was nearby. The lady answered positively. The maid asked again if she was sure. She could tell it like it was. Irina said she wanted to talk to the Duke before going to bed. Emma replied that she would wait outside. If she needs anything, she can just ring the bell. The worker leaned towards the lady's ear and quietly said that his lordship was an animal. If he starts to pester her, the girl might hit him without a second thought. Emma added that he was a strong man, so there was no need to worry. Leaving them alone, the worker went out. Sitting down on the bed, Ian wondered why the maid had suddenly decided to leave the man and the animal alone. Finally, they could talk. Irina nervously clutched the blanket. She didn't know what to do since she didn't expect to be alone with the Duke so soon. They just looked at each other for a few seconds. Then the man either said or asked that she was beautiful. The Countess asked again. Ian smiled and added, "Room. This is the Duchess's bedroom." Her ladyship ran her hand thoughtfully over the bedspread. This room was nothing like her last, even though she and Henry had tried to decorate their home. Lightly touching her hand on the bedspread, Lancaster added that this was his room too. The girl was surprised. She couldn't get her head around the idea that the Duke was covering himself with this floral blanket. His lordship asked if Irina had any desire to sleep in the same bed with him. The redhead answered negatively. Ian hung his head in disappointment and said that his wife was cruel. Her ladyship exhaled wearily and took hold of her whiskey. She asked him to tell her how he found her. The man replied that, as he had said earlier, a little red rat had helped him. The girl was scared, but the Duke told her not to worry, as he had left the children in the mansion. Lancaster took her hand gently in his and told her that she should only worry about him now. Then he lay down on the bed and put her hand on his head. Irina ran her fingers through his hair. It was very soft. The girl removed her hand from his head and asked what his lordship was doing. Ian rolled over onto his side and with a slight smile replied that when he behaved like that with Hugh and his cat, they immediately turned red. The Duke supposed that her ladyship had much to talk about, but thought that they had better go to bed. Propping his head up with his hand, the man looked at her tenderly with a loving gaze. Then he gently took her hand in his and laid his head next to hers on the pillow. At the same time, Ian muttered that together, he and she. Lancaster fell silent. Irina worriedly thought that he really had fallen asleep. After all, she hadn't even used her ability, and he had fallen asleep in the blink of an eye. The Countess wondered if she might have some kind of soporific power. However, her worries would not awaken his lordship. Let it be so. The fire crackled comfortingly in the fireplace. Her ladyship thought that much had happened today. She escaped from the Raincar's mansion and announced her intention to marry the Duke. However, she did not regret anything. With these thoughts, the girl soon fell asleep. In the morning, when Irina was looking out the window, the door opened slightly and she was quietly called. She looked back and saw Tom. He was not alone but with his sister Marian. The children entered the room with the maid. The Countess asked how they were, whether the master had offended them. The boy replied that not at all. Thanks to her, he and his sister can now work in this mansion. Emma confirmed that the boys would work and live here. Tom reported that everyone had been very kind to them. Irina smiled contentedly. The boy said that they still couldn't read, so they wouldn't be able to sign the employment contract. Her ladyship was surprised. Tom explained that when he met the magnanimous Duke, he squeezed his hands very tightly. But there was not a drop of disgust on his face. The gentleman taught him to write his name and gave him a white piece of paper. The Duke asked me to write the name. When the boy did so, then Tom fell silent. Irina asked with interest what happened next. The boy said that the master's assistant, Hugh, tore her apart. If we are to believe the assistant's words, the guy almost signed a contract to enslave himself. So Hugh told him to check carefully the contents of all the papers the Duke gave him. Tom warned the lady to be careful too. A little later at breakfast, the Countess proposed to Ian that they enter into a marriage contract. While eating a jam-smeared tartlet, the man asked if he was really that necessary. Irina asked him in response if he loved her. The Duke replied that he loved her abilities. While stabbing a sausage with a fork, the girl noticed that for his lordship she was no more important than one of his pillows, so he was necessary. Lancaster finally identified the real reason with understanding. The Countess confirmed it. She must take her life into her own hands. She cannot rely on anyone. She will move forward relying only on her own strength. Ian looked at her slyly and asked what would happen if he refused. Then he added whether she would become a tramp. Irina didn't immediately find what to answer. She only mumbled something indistinctly in response. The Duke, spreading jam on another tartlet, remarked that if this was her only condition, he was ready to make concessions for the sake of his love. Her ladyship wondered if he even understood what the word love meant. She asked him what his love meant. The man replied that he meant the girl he saw in his dream. Irina lowered her head, she couldn't believe it. Ian replied that he liked girls who didn't hide their charms. Until now, he had only been surrounded by sycophants. The man smiled, illuminated by the morning sun from the window, and added that he loved honest women like the Countess. The Duke of Lancaster was born with money and high position, not to mention magical abilities, but he had a terrible character. Hugh later told Irina about this in the library. The girl looked at the many books there with pleasure. The assistant explained that his lordship suffers from insomnia. Therefore, in his free time he reads books. He then asked if the lady really wanted to enter into a marriage contract. She confirmed it. The man replied that it was a wise decision. People call the Duke a demon incarnate. He says this as his personal assistant. His lordship cannot be trusted under any circumstances. These words slightly alarmed the Countess. Hugh added that even a merchant in a dark alley offering a special item at a discount inspires more confidence than Lancaster. They walked to the far end of the library where Ian was already waiting for them, and the assistant offered to discuss the terms of the contract. He asked the lady if she had any wishes. If so, she should not hesitate to voice them. Her Grace asked to include in the contract that the Duke would not refuse the wedding under any circumstances. This is her main requirement. She is sure that her father wants to bring her back to the family. But marriage is also a difficult process. If Lancaster refuses the wedding, her life will become hell. Holding the document in his hands, Ian said that he would not leave her even without this agreement. But Irina was adamant. She wanted to have irrefutable proof of their agreement. Taking a cup of tea, the Countess was more than sure that her father would not give up so easily. She needed a reliable ally. The Duke thought for a moment, and then agreed to this condition. The assistant asked if there would be anything else. Her ladyship chuckled, then added a clause about not disclosing her plans. She noted that explanations would be unnecessary. Hugh thought what an unlucky girl she was. Lancaster agreed to that too. The assistant recommended that they move on. The Duke suggested that they sort it out, and he himself decided to rest a little. He settled himself comfortably on the sofa and closed his eyes. Hugh finished filling out the document and asked the Countess to check everything again. After the girl had read the contract, the assistant showed her where to sign. Taking the pen in hand, Irina signed and additionally endorsed the document with a drop of blood. The contract was concluded. The Duke began to snore a little. The girl noticed that he was fast asleep. The assistant replied that she should not be mistaken, since his lordship was too sensitive. Hearing the rustling of papers, Ian sat up and asked what it was. Hugh replied that it was a document on the division of property. Checking another page of the contract, the assistant said that there was talk in society that the eldest daughter of the Raincars family had no abilities. Perhaps these rumors cannot be trusted. However, the Count clearly had some plans for Irina. The Countess agreed. She said that, to tell the truth, no one knows about her abilities. She would like it to remain unknown. The Duke reached out and took the girl's hand in his. He said he did not know if his dream was the result of her power, but he believed it was. Then he kissed her wrist. Her ladyship was in a hopeless situation. The Duke of Lancaster was nothing more than a tool to survive. She couldn't believe he trusted her so easily. Ian said again that he would never leave the girl. He even swore on his little fingers. His lordship had entered into a marriage contract without any love. But ever since the Countess had appeared in his dream, he had firmly decided that he would never let the lady go. He was going to use it. Hugh cleared his throat, drawing attention to himself, and summed it up. The deal was done, and their wedding would take place in a week. Irina asked if it was possible so quickly. The Duke answered that no, it was too late. The assistant reminded them that they needed permission from the Emperor, to which Lancaster replied that he was going to see His Highness right away. The Countess knew that it was impossible to appear before the Emperor at such an hour, even though Ian was his nephew. So she suggested postponing it until tomorrow. His lordship thought for a moment and agreed that she was right. The visit should be made tomorrow. The secretaries even opened their mouths in surprise that the Countess had convinced the gentleman. Perhaps she was even more incredible than they thought. The next morning, the Duke and his assistant were looking through the correspondence in the study. People had already started spreading rumors. The newspaper wrote about a lady in love and a common doctor. Lancaster scratched his head, not understanding why the Earl disliked him so much. Hugh remarked that if he were the Earl, he would have done exactly the same. Ian asked the assistant about his work. The man replied that as far as the gentleman could see, he was working right now. The Duke replied that his job was to observe what was happening and make plans for the future. The assistant thought that his lordship had become more reasonable, perhaps because of his 2 days' sleep. He noticed that it appeared that the Count was hiding the fact that Irina had special abilities. Lancaster crossed his arms on the table and agreed with his assistant. Hugh thought it was the Raincars family's custom to celebrate the arousal of such forces and put them on display. So it was interesting why they decided to hide this fact. Perhaps it was a threat to their lives. Ian tapped his finger thoughtfully on the table and asked, Please, more details from this point on. The secretary replied that as far as he knew, there were 2 more people in the Count's family who had acquired their gift. They were the Count's son, Aiden, and his youngest daughter, Renee. It is said that their abilities can influence the lives of people around them. Despite the fact that the Count announced to everyone about the awakening of the abilities of his son and youngest daughter, he hid the fact of the awakening of the special gift of Mrs. Arena. Hugh assumed that it was thanks to him that the master slept so soundly. The Duke suspected that perhaps her gift had awakened during their first meeting. The assistant asked him again what he was talking about, but then he added that, whatever the case, he believed that her powers were somehow different. The nature of abilities is directly influenced by a person's inner world. And of course, this world is not always innocent. Lancaster thoughtfully propped his head on his hand and asked if he really meant to say that the Countess was capable of controlling people. Hugh didn't answer directly. He just asked what the gentleman thought about it. Did he think that her abilities could really only affect people's sleep? Ian bowed his head thoughtfully over his folded arms, remembering the words of the lullaby he had heard while dozing. The assistant asked again if he was really sure of the accuracy of the words. The gentleman confirmed it. Hugh promised to try to find out about it. Then he asked when the Duke was planning to go to the Imperial Palace. His lordship replied that if he had nothing else, then now. The secretary bowed and wished Lancaster luck. The Imperial Palace sparkled in the sunbeams. Small splashes surrounded the fountain like a rainbow. Everything was in perfect order. The Emperor was drinking tea in a comfortable armchair by the library window. That's where his nephew found him. They were somewhat similar in appearance. Only His Majesty was older and had a small mustache. Ian greeted his uncle and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The Emperor asked how he knew that he was there. Then he added that, however, it didn't matter. The Duke had made quite a lot of noise lately, so the chieftain asked what his nephew was up to. His lordship replied that nothing. Handing over the marriage contract, he said that he had finally decided to start a family. Sitting down in the next chair, Lancaster asked to sign the marriage license. The Emperor looked at his younger sister's only son. For some unknown reason, the boy was suffering from insomnia. The nephew had been causing trouble for his uncle for years, but he was not to blame. Taking the document, the Emperor asked not to make him laugh. After all, he hadn't even seen the bride's face. Ian said he wanted the eldest daughter of Count Rain-Cars. His Majesty noticed that his son Astasio was in love with the Count's youngest daughter. But he needs a worthy reason to approve of his nephew's marriage to the Countess. The Duke, nervously fiddling with his fingers, said that he had seen a dream. It seemed that Rain-Car's eldest daughter had awakened a special gift. The uncle was surprised. Even the famous doctors and magicians of the Empire could not cure their nephew's illness. His parents believed that the shock he experienced after the kidnapping was to blame. But even after months, Ian's insomnia persisted. Now he says he had a dream. The Emperor thoughtfully noted that the Count had not spoken of any of his eldest daughter's abilities that morning. He appealed to His Highness with a request to persuade the Duke to renounce his daughter. The nobleman claimed that his daughter already had a fiancé, but he did not mention her gift. The uncle asked if this was true. Lancaster confirmed but added that it was a secret. The girl was not yet confident in her abilities. The Emperor asked if there had been a split in the Count's family. The Duke replied that he did not know the details. His Highness noted that Rain-Car's son and daughter were capable of managing life, but Ian specified that Arena had a somewhat different gift. Then he added that nevertheless her power did allow him to fall asleep. The uncle was surprised. He said that it seemed that the Count himself did not know about his daughter's abilities. The Rain-Cars received their power from the spirits. The people have always extolled the descendants of this line. They are as important to the country as the imperial dynasty. Ian handed the Emperor a pen and asked him to sign. The leader noticed that his nephew was behaving like a child. He must understand what would happen if he signed the marriage license. Lancaster replied that of course he knew. While handing over the signed document, His Highness asked the Duke not to make unnecessary noise. But rumors about Irene and Henry continued to spread, even after Ian received His Majesty's consent. Soon the rumors turned into gossip, burying the truth. The newspapers wrote that the doctor loved the Countess and did not want to see her cry. That is why he was trying so hard to get her back. When Lancaster saw the article, he slammed his palm on the table and said it was madness. Hugh asked what they were trying to achieve with this lie. Ian laughed. He couldn't understand why the Earl was disgracing his daughter by labeling her as crazy. The assistant asked to read the article to the end. It said that the Duke knew about Arena's illness. So he convinced her to have the wedding, knowing that she would not be able to think it through on her own. His lordship was shocked, because it was not like that at all. The secretary confirmed. Lancaster folded his hands in front of him and smiled. An idea had struck him. He suggested hiring these reporters. Hugh noted that this was not the time for jokes. Be that as it may, Ian asked not to show the newspaper to Irina, because no matter what they did, it would only add fuel to the fire. The assistant said that the Countess did not have free time to read such stupid articles. The Duke was surprised and asked for clarification. The secretary explained that her ladyship had been working hard to learn how to be a wife lately.